Sorry, oh, did it switch back?
Yeah. All by itself.
All by itself, all right. Some slides. On that. You, let's save it. Slide. But we'll get through it. We'll get through it. I have to ad lib the whole thing. You saw how I did, it, right? I can tell a lot.
You don't have storage, you're not very good at it.
Okay, I got the thumbs up sign.
Oh, that's right, we gotta do the chin thing.
The chin thing, yeah. I'm not doing the chin thing. Good evening. Thank you for coming to Bimmy. I gotta tell you, this is so much fun. It's fun for me, for sure. I hope it's fun for you. You know, in the last month, we had a talk about the Block Island seal population. Then we had to talk about the Block Island shark population. Then we had to talk about Block Island's changing coastlines. It turns out the person who wrote and talked to us about that wrote a chapter in our speaker's latest book. So while we're studying all these marine organisms and what they're doing around the island, we're now coming back around to one of our most favorite creatures, the striped bass. And it's interesting to me how the connection between that and our coastline is pretty significant. And Dennis will tell you a lot about Block Island's coastline. Now, I didn't introduce the speaker yet, though. This is Dennis Zambrata. He has been fishing Block Island for, well, not as long as I've been alive, but damn near. Oh, well, that's not that long. I'm sorry. I oversold him. I mean, that only 1985. I stopped fishing here in 1985, but now I'm back. But he has written a couple books about fishing on Block Island, and he's very well known to people who fish the island. And I just learned out tonight that he is also a very very knowledgeable freshwater fisherman on Block Island as well. So, you know, you can learn about saltwater fishing from Dennis, but don't hesitate to ask him about his freshwater fishing expertise as well. So Bimmy's mission is to inspire appreciation and conservation of the saltwater environment. And I think with having speakers like Mr. Dennis Zambrata, we're doing a darn good job of that. So if you support Bimmy, you like our programs, please consider a donation so we continue to offer our tours of the aquarium free and also not charge admission to these Tuesday talks. And I've been told that the best way to talk into the mic is to put it on your chin, so that's why I'm doing this silly thing here. Anyway, it's working though, isn't it? So thank you for coming. It makes me so happy to see you all here. And now, a guy who I hadn't met before tonight, but he is going to become a dear friend, I'm sure of it, Dennis Zambrata.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that introduction. But I did. Very, very good food. We were just there. That was awesome. Anyway, thank you for the great introduction. My name is Dennis Zambrata. I reside in Newport, Rhode Island. I've been fishing Block Island, surf casting Block Island since 1985. I've been a surf caster way long before that, but I did discover Block Island in the mid-1980s when there was a phenomenal run of striped bass out here. A time period when the striped bass were not doing very well as a fishery, but kind of like the last of the buffalo, Block Island was the place where these last of the striped bass would come every fall, late fall, mid-October to almost mid-December some years. So the runs lasted really, really long. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, the old days. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the new days, how the fishery has changed, things like that. And if you have questions, by all means, raise your hand. If something's not coming through clear, yell at me. Say, hey, Dennis, what do you mean by that? So I got 100 and something slides, so I want to be able to get through this fairly quick for you. But anyway, here we go. We're going to talk about Block. Okay, here we go. Everybody's heard of Block Island. Obviously, we called it the pork chop back then because it is shaped like the pork chop. One of my favorite memories of Block Island was when I first came here, talking to the native islanders, and they would be talking about, hey, I'm going to America tomorrow. And I'm like, what? Oh yeah, we go back to America about every 3 or 4 weeks to go shop. And I'm like, America? Yeah, that's what we call the mainland. Right. And that was like so bizarre for me. And it's a great Block Island thing. I mean, it's a tradition. Block Island has traditions on this island that are unlike any other. Even if it's something as simple as calling the rest of the United States America. It's just weird. But anyway, I love it. Here we go, Block Island, then and now. Okay. We all know it's 13 miles from the mainland, 14 miles from Montauk. The thing that gets surfcasters excited is the 17 miles of coastline. And the thing about Block Island is, unlike a lot of the other New England islands that have a lot of private shoreline, just about every inch of Block Island coastline is accessible to everybody, surfcasters included. And that's what really, really drew a lot of the most avid surfcasters to Block Island. Access was easy. There were no parking signs, things like that we generally will run into on Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Cape Cod, the mainland, things like that. So the 17 miles of coastline are key. A little bit of what we do. Surfcasters generally will start out here April, and it'll last again into December on some years. This is a November fish at Southwest Point. They don't all have to be big to be pretty. Fishing in a northeast gale with water like that just really invigorates the soul. Okay. And of course, there's nothing like dawn on the island. This is down at Black Rock Cove, down at the south end. I mean, even if you don't catch fish, you're fishing in the most beautiful place in the world. There's nothing else, nowhere else that I've been surf casting for striped bass is as pretty as Block Island. Okay, what we're going to cover. I'm going to give you a general overview of the island, a game plan for surf casting based on environmental conditions, how to play the moon, tide, wind, and current. So there's a lot that goes involved with avid surf casters. Block Island structure, and a little bit of the storied history of Block Island surf casting. So my general rules on Block Island when I surf cast. Okay, all conditions considered equal, not having any reports on how the fishing is. If I were to come out here, not having to talk to anybody. This is my general rule. When the tide is incoming or on the flood, I will go straight to the south end or the east side of the island. That's where I'll start, not knowing anything about if there's fish here or there. But outgoing tide or ebb tide, I would fish the north end or the west side. So those are my just general rules, not knowing anything else. I would hopefully cast into the wind within reason, as long as it's not 55 knots. Okay, so those are my general rules. Ebb tide, west side, the wind's in my face with a northwest wind, that's where I'm going. Have a game plan. I'll tell you about the game plans. And just remember to at best, don't read these rules. Okay, so you got to be flexible. If you talk to somebody that say, hey, the wind was in my face last night on the west side, but I went to the east side and it was at my back and I caught all these fish, it's going to happen. So there's my game plan. Okay, I start out using artificial lures or plugs to work a stretch of shoreline. And I do it quickly. I'll go to a stretch of shoreline. I'll get to a stretch of shoreline. I'll take 3 or 4 casts. I'll move maybe 100 feet down, 3 or 4 casts. And I work it quickly. Plugs catch the aggressive bass. If there's aggressive bass there, they're going to hit. They're going to hit right away. Needlefish is a great search lure. For those that may not know, these are needlefish. There's no hooks on these. You can kind of pass these around. It's just a straight stick-looking type lure. They cast really, really good, and you can work them quick, and you can work a stretch of shoreline quick. So what I do is I go one direction working plugs, and the way I used to call it is I catch all the uneducated fish with the plugs if they would hit the plug. On my way back, I switch over and I start using eels, live or rigged, to catch the fish that are a little smarter and say, hey, that's a plug. I'm not biting it. But they'll hit an eel. Eels are really, really good for striped bass. So what's the difference between using eels and plugs? About 10 pounds. So you'll go out to a stretch of shoreline. You might catch fish in the 10 to 15 pound range or 5 to 10 pound range. So if they're in the 5 to 10 pound range on lures, they may be in the 10 to 20 pound range on live eels. The bigger fish tend to be a little bit more cautious and will hit more natural baits like live eels. Scout areas during the daylight. If you're out here and you're out here to surf cast, especially in the fall, these are things you want to look for. You want to, if there's bait fish washed on the shoreline, it's a dead giveaway. They're being chased there for some reason. Generally, it's game fish. These are sand eels. Look for terns, which are those little small birds. You may see them. They squawk like crazy. They dive in the water a lot. They're eating live fish. Watch for them. I don't know if anybody knows what a gulp is, but a gulp of cormorants. Not a single cormorant, but when you get a group of cormorants, they call them gulps. If you see a group of cormorants together, and they're all diving and coming up, and diving and coming up, eating something, you want to fish in that area because they are eating live fish. They're eating small live fish, and those small live fish may draw in striped bass. They probably do have striped bass around, or seals. Could be seals nowadays, but. Okay, so if you come along a shoreline like I did 2 years ago at Black Rock, and you see that washed up, either somebody dumped some bait on the beach, or they were pushed up by fish. In the case of 2 years ago, this kind of thing was 100 yards long down at Black Rock. I came across, I could smell it before I got there. And then all of a sudden I see all of these fish washed up, and I pay more attention to the water, and I can see all the live schools of big menhaden that are right in the wash being pushed in by striped bass and bluefish. So these are the kind of things that you want to pay attention for. You get to see them at night. And if you see this at night, fish there. Okay. Check out locations on the island at low water and make mental notes of where you might be able to fish. The reason I say that is a lot of these places at high tide will fill in. And if you're not familiar with the area, you can cast your lure. Say you're casting your lure at high water, the water's up here. You don't even see these rocks after dark, and you'll lose your lures. But if you check it out at low tide, you'll know next to these two big rocks, you have an alley here, okay, where you can cast the lures and get them back, so you don't lose $20. Okay. Nighttime is the time to fish. Take it from any of the avid surf casters. After dark, striped bass are a nocturnal feeder. They will feed in the daytime, but they love it at night. And it's easier to fool them at night most times, but fish after dark. Okay, we have surf bags that we carry on our shoulders, and they're filled with all sorts of different kind of lures. I call it my toolbox. For me, the needlefish plug, which is going around, is my flathead screwdriver. I use it a lot. Minnow plugs, which basically kind of a swimmer with a lip, swimming lip. They are my Phillips head screwdriver. I use those a lot also. But when it really comes down to none of my other tools are working, eels, live and rigged. Rigged eel means it's a dead eel that you rig with a hook harness. Those are my hammer. Those things really, really work well. Sometimes it does. The problem is with live eels, they don't cast very well into the wind. So what I'll do is I'll have rigged eels and live eels. If I have a wind that's like 15 or 20 knots into my face, I can't get a live eel out far enough, but a dead rigged eel will cast into that wind. So I'll be able to use a rigged one. Okay, needles and fins. Those are needlefish. The top lure there is a redfin that's kind of going around, a cotton cordell redfin. There's a bunch of different types of needlefish. The general rules on my needlefish, again, these are general. Calm surf, I used to use a Gibbs, a Lemire, a 24/7. Those are all brand names of lures. Fish them very slowly. The Gibbs needle at the time was the closest one that would float, because a lot of these needlefish will sink and they may hang up in the rocks in the weed. Rough surf, I use a Super Strike needle, which is another type of needle. It's made out of plastic, and it sinks a little bit faster than those that are made out of wood. Okay. So a Super Strike needle. The colors I like on the needles are black, Block Island green, which is a really bright green like you'll see on that lure, and a yellow and white belly. I mean, they come in a zillion other colors, but if you only have a little bit of money to spend, you can't go wrong with black, green, and yellow/white. Rough water, heavy sweep. Those plastic Super Strikes that you've got there, they make them now, they're loaded with extra lead, but back in the day, you had to load them with water or BBs or a lead shot to get them to cast better. So the rougher the water, you want to use something that gets a little bit lower in the water column and doesn't get lost in the churning surf, where a striped bass may not be able to pick it up, but if it's 6 inches down below the maelstrom, the striped bass will home in on it. Okay. Habs and after hour needles. Habs are really hard to get now. He has passed away. His lures are no longer in production, but you can still get them on a collector's market. And after hours, they're the best casting lures, the best casting needlefish that I've ever used. And excuse me. The colors I like on those are chartreuse, yellow, pink, green, and black. So here's a Gibbs needlefish with 2 treble hooks on. We call the bright neon green Block Island green. The color was kind of developed out here. Here's an interesting story. When I first started to come out here in 1985, 86 time frame. I went to Twin Maples and to get some extra Gibbs needlefish. Mac Swinton at the time, who was John's dad, who's now passed, he had a whole wall full of Gibbs needlefish, but he didn't have any in that color. I go, where's all you? He said, I can't get green. He says, but go to the hardware store. And I go, why? He goes, they got a ton of fluorescent green. I said, really? In a hardware store on Block Island? So I went to Block Island Hardware. I go in there. They have like 5 cans of white, 5 cans of black, 5 cans of red, yellow, like 35 cans of fluorescent green paint. They stocked it because everybody was painting Max needles green. They would go there to repaint the ones that they got from Mac because he couldn't get green ones, green. And it was kind of an interesting thing that the Block Island Hardware was able to pick up on that color and go, wow, people are going to buy this color. Nobody buys Block Island. You know, fluorescent green on Block Island, what are you going to use it for? But anyway, that's a little story. Another Block Island story that makes things really interesting. This is the Super Strike needlefish. I use it as my search plug. I fish it fast or slow at night. Those are the colors I like to use: pink, Block Island green, yellow, black, and purple. Block Island had its own Lemire needlefish. It's got a new own needlefish now. Hank Hewitt makes his own out here. But back then, Al Lemire was making them. Those were pretty good. Those were all also offered at Twin Maples at the time. What we used to do with the needlefish back then is we would put extra strong hooks on them because the fish out at Block Island during the 1980s were huge. A small one during those lean years was like 10 pounds. Okay, and the big ones went into the 70-pound range. So they were very, very big fish, hard to land, would destroy your hooks, straighten the hooks. They had a lot of leverage on. So we had to cow-proof our needles by adding all extra duty hardware, which is the hooks and the split rings on them. The red fins, which I kind of sent around, cotton cordell red fins. Nighttime, we use black and purple, chicken scratch. Chicken scratch is the top one up on the top. It's yellow and green stripes. And then we used to load them with 10 cc's of water. You poke a hole in the top of the head, squirt in 10 cc's of water, seal the hole. The plug worked so much better, cast a lot better, and caught a lot more fish. I used to customize the red fins. Now this is where we get into the craziness of surf casters, what they do to make a lure that looks just like any other lure, a little bit different. We used to customize them. We adjusted the action of these lures by loading with water and using different size hooks. So a loaded redfin with 2 4-0 trebles, which is the largest size we would use, was to get longer casts and to catch big fish. When there were a lot of big fish around, we put 4-0 hooks on. But normally you wouldn't do that. When we needed a little bit more wiggle on the back end of the lure, we would change it from a 4-0 in the front and a 3-0 on the back. And it allowed the tail to wiggle a little bit more because it wasn't as heavy. And then 2 3-0s was best all around if the fish weren't monstrous. That had the best action. And then if we needed something that stayed right on the surface, like we were fishing it in a lot of weed and things like, weed covered boulders where the fish are in there. You wouldn't believe it, but big striped bass are in this deep of water. And say you got 3 feet of water, 1 foot down, you've got all that floating bubble weed that's notorious in the Block Island boulder fields. You needed a lure that stayed on the top, and we would fish it with 2 two 2-0 trebles to keep the plug up on the top. Other plugs catch fish. This is a couple of friends of mine, Tom White and his friend, GRS swimmers, Gary Soldati swimmers. You'll notice that these guys are in wetsuits. More and more over the years, fishermen are fishing in wetsuits. When I first came to Block Island, it was a rare event to see anybody in a wetsuit. Everybody was in chest waders or short boots and splash pants. Obviously, that limits to where you can go. But the wetsuit craze really increased access that allows, if you, I don't know if any of you have been out there when a wetsuit guy is on a rock, you go, how did he get out there? Some of the guys swim out to rocks. They find a flat rock perch. They get on it, and they're fishing in water that a boat can fish, but a traditional surfcaster would never reach that water. Okay, live eels. How do you fish them? How do you carry them? How do you do this, that? The best thing I ever found is a soft lunch bag. You know, you go to Walmart, they're probably about $10. They're kind of insulated. They're soft. They have a zipper. I use the soft cooler bag to carry the eels. The pot scrubbers, the green pot scrubbers that you can get are great eel rags. And they're washable, things like that. So eels are very slimy. You can grab them with a green pot scrubber and keep them in your hand without, you know, they're over $2 right now. So if you drop one in the water, you just drop $3 in the water. So, and this is what I do. I throw them in the air. I put a little plastic bottle of ice in it, and I keep them cool like that, and that's how I carry them. This is the kind of structure that you like to fish eels in. This is Martin's Point at Dory's Cove. Very rocky. Like routinely, guys will wade out as far as they can get, especially if it's calm like that, and cast eels. That striped bass love to kind of grub around in that rocky structure for crabs, green crabs, lobsters, things like that. And an eel is like the perfect bait to use when they're grubbing and they're not actively looking on top for finfish. Daytime lures. This is probably what everybody starts out using when they start surf casting, is poppers, the top two, metal lures like the Hopkins, bucktail jigs, like those things with lead head and feathers on them. Those are real popular to use in the daylight. You'll see a lot of guys using those. The poppers are to tease fish into striking on top. They make a lot of surface activity. They're generally not used a lot after dark. Okay. That's because the fish are generally not attracted to noise after dark, but they every once in a while, like I said, generally. But popper use is not real popular after dark. All right, a little bit about moons. Like, here's another thing that us crazy surfcasters get into is moons. Like, what phase of the moon are we going to fish? Well, you know, for whatever reason. I'll get into that. Full moon. Full moon produces extreme high and low tides. Extreme tides often produce dirty or weedy water on Block Island, which can be a bane for us. And then a full moon also makes it very bright. Bright conditions generally make the fish more cautious. Sometimes it's very hard to fool the striped bass. We know they're there, but because it's shallow water, the fish might be reading the name of the lure as it goes by. I don't know. But boat fishermen absolutely love a full moon because it gives them more current to fish, but they're fishing 30, 40 feet deep. So the moon doesn't have that much of an effect on them, on those fish, because those fish are a lot deeper than a surfcaster fish. Full moon surf casting tactic. During full moon, pay attention to times of moonrise and moon set. So if you don't like fishing a bright period, concentrate your efforts on the times before a full moon rises. Because once you know the moon is going to come up, a lot of times you'll have a good bite of striped bass. The moon comes up, it gets real bright, it shuts off. The fish gets smart. And then certain months will allow you a window opportunity to fish when the full moon sets. Okay. That's generally October and November. Fish after midnight on bright nights before the date of a full moon, as the moon will set between 1 and 5. So you can get moon tide charts or moon phase charts that'll give you the times of when the moon rises and sets. Pay attention to those things. The period right after a moon set is one of my favorite times. So I may like skip fishing until 3 o'clock in the morning, get up at 3 because I know the moon is going to set. I know it's going to be dark after that. Okay. And then consequently fish evening darkness before moon rises. In November, it gets dark really early. The moon will rise on a full moon, maybe about 7 or 8 o'clock, but it gets dark at like 5. Fish 5 to 7. Get out there before it gets bright. And look for conditions that provide cover. Deep water, white water, current, or even shadow lines. And then cloud cover. When we're out here on a bright moon period, we're all like, oh God, I hope it's cloudy tonight. I hope it's going to rain tonight, because it obscures the moon and it makes it a lot darker. Bright moon tactics. If you're going to fish on a bright moon, a lot of times you need to go to little tiny things. We call them teasers or droppers. You fish those ahead of a lure. Okay, they're little things. They're probably about this long. They fool very wary striped bass. All right. This is about the best picture I can do of a dark moon. I mean, when it's a new moon, you can't see it. So the new, or what we call the surfcaster's moon. We all love the new moon because it's dark. It's like out on Block Island in November, it's really dark. Very dark conditions occur on four days either side of a new. It also produces extreme tides. And again, extreme tides could make the water really dirty or weedy. And another negative effect about the dark moon period is fire in the water or phosphorescence. George, do you do any tours with any of the people on phosphorescence? But you'd have to do them like after dark. It's a really phenomenal event. If you can get out there and watch a wave when there's a lot of phosphorescence in the water, it's like the ocean is on fire. And it's so, you talk to people about it that have never been out in a dark moon, and you go, well, what do you mean? Why? Well, there's all these microorganisms in the water and they light up, and it's phenomenal to see it. And I recommend any of you that if you can't sleep at night and it's during a new moon, go down to Dory's Cove or Grace's Cove and look at the water for a while. Because if it's out, it's unbelievable. It's really, really a wild thing. But it also makes your lure, so if your lure is 7 inches long and you cast it in the phosphorescence, that lure looks like it's about 3 feet long, because there's like it's almost like a contrail of movement, and all these organisms get disturbed and they light right up. It's a phenomenal event, but sometimes fire is not beneficial to surfcasters. And it only or more prevalently occurs during the dark moon periods. And after dark, I mean, people would say, well, why would you use the black plug in the darkest moon when you can't even see the lure in front of your eyes when you hold it up? Striped bass have phenomenal awareness of everything in the water. It's a silhouette. They see the silhouette. They feel the silhouette in their lateral line. They can find black lures really, really easy. For some reason, black lures in the darkest of nights can really, really work much better than a white lure. And only striped bass know why. So, wind, the other factor. East is least, west is best. Who knows? Along with tide, wind will have a significant influence on your environment and game fish activity. Wind can cause bass to strike with reckless abandon, but it can also dirty an otherwise bass-filled shoreline with weed and make it impossible to fish. So it goes back both ways. Conversely, lack of any wind can make game fish a lot more tentative to feed in shallow water. Fish the windy shore, kind of what I started, fish against the wind, wind in your face, especially at the beginning of a steady blow. When the wind around here, when it goes northeast during a nor'easter, the beginning of a nor'easter, when that wind starts to freshen, everybody heads to, we used to head to Grove Point up at the north end, but now more likely we're heading towards Old Harbor Point and the area behind Ballards and that little rocky chute that goes out. There's a jetty there. That area at the beginning of a nor'easter can get very, very good before it gets weedy. And then position yourself to cast directly into a headwind, which is fairly easy to do. I mean, it's easier to do that than an angle. If the wind's at an angle, use the angle at your advantage to cast diagonally. So if it's coming over your right shoulder, say just turn this way and cast kind of at an angle along the shoreline to allow you to get a little bit more distance. And needlefish plugs are a great plug to use when it's windy because they kind of blast through the wind. This is kind of general reading a weather chart. If you see a system, a low system or a high system coming up the coastline or coming across the United States and it's going to go by New England or by Block Island or across Block Island, if you see the system, the low pressure gradient or the high pressure gradient, and it has really, really close lines, it's going to be windy as hell. If it's like that, then you get like the Bermuda High where the isobars are far apart, you're going to have lighter winds. That's just a kind of a basic thing. I don't know if everybody knows that, but if you want to read a weather, and we always pay attention to this. It's a little easier now with online weather reports and stuff, but, and then this is the other thing. You can kind of get an idea where if the low's coming up the coast, which circulation is going to be, where the wind is going to circulate when the low gets past you and when it's approaching you. Same thing with a high pressure system. Kind of gives you an idea of what the forecast is going to be. Again, nowadays, weather forecasts are a lot better. But back in the 1980s, we were like watching these systems as they were approaching, like, oh, hey, we got to fish hard tonight because tomorrow night it's going to be right in our face, 50 knots. So we would watch them very closely. Tides are the vertical rise and fall of water. Tidal exchange is the difference in depth between low and high. In Rhode Island, that's approximately 2 to 4 feet. On some full moon tides, you may get it up to about 5 feet, but that's generally the approximate range. The difference between high and low tides is approximately 6 hours and 15 minutes on average. So if you know the low tides at 6, you know midnight's going to be fairly high. The greatest flow of water occurs between the 3rd and 4th hour of an ebb or a flood tide. We like to be there when that's happening. Moving water is good for striped bass fishing. Popular question posed is what is the best tide to fish? You really can't tie that to anything unless you know the specific location. Okay. So you have to tie it to a specific location because you can't just tell anybody like, oh, on Block Island, you want to fish at high tide. Well, that doesn't always, it's not always the case. There's a lot of places like Southwest Point on the southwest corner of the island where if we all were waiting for low tide, because low tide, you can fit a lot more people there. You have a lot more current. So there are places where low tide is preferable. Okay, some locations are always good, but traditional surfcaster can't reach them unless the tide is out. I mean, that's kind of natural. Unless you're in a wetsuit, then you can kind of swim to those other areas. But some places, once the tide gets out, if you're on waders, you can actually get on that rock and reach a little further. High tide, you won't be able to do it because it'll be over your waders. The more gradual the depth change in a particular location, the greater potential that tide stage can potentially make a difference. So on a bridge or a pier, tide is just basically vertical. It's not going to mean a whole lot, but on a gradual shoreline, like North Bar, I'm thinking of a few places where it's generally fairly a gradual slope. Low tide can be really good because we can get out a lot farther into certain areas because it's a gradual slope. Okay, current. So we had tides which are vertical movement of water. Current is horizontal movement of water. Current can be caused by the tide, wind, and waves. Currents have various stages of flow depending on tide and wind conditions. You got to learn them for where you fish. I mean, I can't really tell you much more than that, but as you fish more and more, you'll learn them. Currents enhance feeding opportunities for game fish because it brings food to them. Other areas of moving water current take place at prominent points which jut out into the sea. Southwest Point is very, very much like that. Black Rock Point is very much like that. The channel at New Harbor is very much like that. It narrows the flow, and so the flow really increases where it's narrow. Moving water produced by currents itself doesn't ensure success. There may be other factors. Okay, sweep, it's another type of current. Sweep is also the horizontal movement of water, but sweep is created by wind and waves. So if you have waves diagonally moving down a beach, it's pushing water along that beach. It's creating current. Heavy wind sweep can produce some phenomenal events. Northeast to the northeast, a really hard northeast wind at the southern part of Grace's Cove, that shoreline, just around that point. Kind of in the area where the dead whale is now, a northeast wind, a real hard northeast, really pushes the water through there. And it puts current in a place that there's not a whole lot of current normally. It's not easy to fish effectively when you have really, really heavy wind sweep. But you can use another batch of different types of plugs to do that. And we call these like casting swimmers, darters, things like that, metal lips, where you can cast it and it holds into a sweep really, really good. Okay, be there on the change. And this is what I mean by that. Bass are very often reacting to changes in environment. You should be casting on a tide change. So if you have a tide change that's going to happen, don't quit then. Say, oh, let's just hang another half hour for the tide to change. On a wind shift, if you know the wind's going to shift at night, fishing is terrible, but the wind's going to shift any minute, kind of hang a little while. When a bright moon sets, sets or before a bright moon rises, I kind of went through that. And when a current starts, stops, or changes direction. New Harbor Channel is like that. A lot of people will go to New Harbor Channel at high tide and they'll expect it to be moving, and a lot of times it's slack. And if you only waited about 30 minutes, all of a sudden that current is really going to start to move out. So you want to be there when the current starts. This is kind of something I took out of a freshwater, but I applied it to saltwater. A section of stripe of coast does not reveal itself at once. You must visit it often, study its shoreline and currents, and then you will begin to appreciate and understand it. A visiting surfcaster may leave after a short outing, swearing it's the worst location on earth. There's guys that I've met out here like, I'm never coming to Block Island. Again, it sucks out here. But another guy will come out here, hitting at the right time, and will say it's the best striped bass water around. But nobody's correct on that because it's a lot of times it's luck of the draw. Okay, this is Gary Soldati out at Old Harbor Point. This is what a lot of people may not actually see, but people go into that bubbleweed boulder fields to try and find a flat rock to stand on and cast their lures. It's not your traditional go down on the beach and cast into a sand beach environment. Avid surfcasters fish in very gnarly environments. Again, Gary's in a wetsuit. Okay, now I'm going to get into the island a little bit. The Neck. These are all like well-known names, some fishing names of places on the north part of the island, what most of us call the Neck. That area here. Kind of a hub fishing with seals. I mean, when I first came out here in the 1980s, to see a seal, it was like news the next day. Like, hey, I saw a seal down at Grace's Point last night. He popped his head out of the water. Oh, really? I haven't seen one of those in years. Now it's kind of a fact of life. So we've kind of had to get used to it. And I just want to let you know, there's Sandy Point. This is Sandy Point pre-seals. If you take an aerial shot of Sandy Point nowadays, there's a lot. There's a lot of seals out there. A lot of surfcasters won't even go out there anymore. We're not supposed to harass them. That's not. I don't think I know many surfcasters that really want to deal with that. So they kind of leave that area alone. But it's a very good surfcasting location. A little bit into transition zones. So you have a sandy cove that everybody, I don't know if everybody recognizes that parking lot, but it's before you go out to the north end and North Light. But there's a little bar there called Grove Point, and we call that a transition zone. So you have basically a sandy, cobbly beach from the north end coming down, and it hits an abrupt little point there of boulder fields. And after that, everything becomes boulders. Fish love changes in structure, striped bass especially. Those are the areas you want to concentrate your efforts. Okay, this is the Grove Point bar on a normal day at low water. People go out and wade into those waves to fish. Again, you do have to deal with seals. There's a lot there. As soon as they see you, you'll see heads pop up because they look for that. I mean, see, it's funny. They know what a bent rod looks like. So the one way to keep them from getting your fish, and it's not that they're going to steal your fish, but I don't want them to get a face full of hooks because some of them will get hooked when they eat a fish that has a lure in it. So we want to protect them too. So keep the rod down. Don't yell. Don't scream, hey, I got one. They've become very, very good. They're very, very good. Okay. This is the Balls and, Pots and Kettles, Balls Point, Jerry's Point, the northeast corner, Mansion Beach. Great area to fish. Not as many seals, but they're there. This is kind of typical structure. Now, you see that rock all the way out at the end? That's wetsuit territory. That's where guys will go and fish. There may be about, depending on the stage of tide, 5, 6, 7 feet of water between the shoreline and that rock, but they'll doggy paddle out to it. They'll get up on that flat rock and fish to get out a little further. Kind of more structure there on the northeast side. East side, now we're getting back into the area that I do fish a lot. This is the east side, what we call the east side as surfcasters. Old Harbor Point, the Bass Stand, the Chute, which has got a really unique nickname I won't get into. Yeah, you're laughing. You know it. Okay. It's a jetty that's down from the spring house. Can be really good, but it's a dangerous spot to fish too. This is Old Harbor Point. A friend of mine made a fishing calendar back in 2009 or 2010 of Block Island spots from the air. He took some phenomenal high resolution spots. This is one of them. There's that jetty up in the right-hand corner. Really good area to fish. That's the Chute. If you're going to fish the Chute, don't fish it on a big swell. Don't take kids out there. It's slippery. It's very, very slippery. It can be dangerous. I've seen people go out there on really gnarly conditions. But if you're going to go out there and the tide's up, this area along these rocks is super good. That's cast lures over there. Okay, along the edges of those rocks. I mean, a lot of people will cast straight out, but cast to the right. Okay, this is what we call the Ballard's Bass Stand. This area used to have an old fishing stand that was behind, it's probably about halfway through this photograph towards Ballard's Beach. But it used to have a couple pipes sticking up, which were the last remnants of that old bass stand. Really, really good, but as you can see, it's very rocky, but the fishing at high water can be really good in there, high tide. This is Cat Rock Cove. If you look over towards here, you can see some parts of the wreck. There's still pieces of that wreck there. The green arrow. This is what it looked like about 12, 13 years ago. And this is what it looked like the day it ran aground. That's Mr. Huggins. I don't know if anybody knows one of the Huggins. But it got stuck. They could never get it off. You can see there's a boat out there trying to tow it out. It ended up just becoming a wreck in there, and that wreck still exists down that way. South End, Great Point, Snake Hole, Barlow's, the Corners, Slide, Spar Point, Anderson's, Tom's Point. One of my favorite areas to fish. Here's what we kind of call the South End. You know where Painted Rock is? Go past Painted Rock, go down to Vail Beach. A place that we call Snake Hole is the Vail Beach access. Barlow's Point, Spar Point, Black Rock Point, Lewis Point. If you really want to be alone when you're fishing, fish from here to here. It's the hardest part to access on the island, but if you want solitude as a surf caster, that's where you go. You're not going to run into too many people because they don't like to walk that far. It's a long walk in from the Southwest Point, Dickens Point. Dickens Point used to have an access, but I don't know what the bluff looks like now. It was pretty abrupt the last time I went there, and it dropped straight off, so there really wasn't any. So this is kind of South End from aerial view from Southeast Light up. You can see Montauk kind of in the distance. Great surf casting area. That's what Black Rock looks like at low tide. We like to get out on all those rocks. Here's an interesting photograph showing a comparison of the bluff view of Black Rock back in the old days, and then back maybe about 10 years ago when it sanded in one year. I mean, it changes dramatically down there. Brian Oakley probably touched about what's going on with the bluffs and the erosion, but